For nearly 20 years, I've worked as a helicopter pilot for Utah's Department of Public Safety. People usually think my job is just high-speed chases or transporting VIPs, but the reality is much more diverse and often much darker. My team and I cover everything from wildfire containment to disaster response. But the bread and butter of our unit is search and rescue deep in the Rocky Mountains. I operate out of the Wasatch Cache National Forest, a massive, rugged landscape about 30 miles east of Salt Lake City. It's beautiful, but it's unforgiving. I'm on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That means I've left half-eaten Thanksgiving dinners and woken up from deep sleep at 3 a.m. to the sound of my phone screaming, signaling that someone is dying in the wilderness. Usually the calls are routine: a hiker with a broken ankle, a climber stuck on a ledge, or a skier buried in an avalanche. We swoop in, hoist them out, and get them to safety. But every once in a while, we get a call that defies logic. This specific incident happened a couple of years ago, and I still lose sleep trying to make sense of it. It started with a 911 call from a terrified wife. Her husband had gone for a solo day hike near Hayden Peak and hadn't returned. Night had fallen and temperatures were dropping fast. I fired up the Airbus H-125, our workhorse helicopter designed for high-altitude performance, and took off from Salt Lake. Within minutes, we were soaring over the jagged peaks, the moonlight reflecting off the snow. We reached the search area and began our grid. Ground teams were already down there on ATVs, combing the trails, but they hadn't found a trace. It was like the mountain had swallowed him whole. We decided to expand our search radius, flying miles away from his intended path. We ended up over Wilson Peak, the highest point in Utah. This area is brutal: sheer vertical cliffs, deep snowpack, and zero trails. It makes no sense for a casual hiker to be there. Suddenly, my co-pilot shouted over the headset. He had spotted a faint heat signature on the thermal imaging camera. It was weak, fading fast, but it was definitely human. I banked the chopper hard to get a visual. There, on a narrow, isolated bluff about 8,000 feet up, sat our missing man. He was in a bad way. No backpack, no climbing gear, just a light jacket. He was slumped against the rock face, barely moving, lazily waving one arm at us. I radioed the coordinates to the ground team, but the news wasn't good. The approach of that bluff was a sheet of ice and vertically steep. It would take their specialized climbing team at least 2 hours to reach him. I looked down at the man. He wasn't moving much. The wind chill up here was deadly. "He doesn't have 2 hours," I told my crew. "We have to go in." It was a dangerous maneuver. I had to lower the helicopter into a tight space between towering pine trees and the cliff face, fighting unpredictable wind shear that threatened to slam us into the rock. My winch medic, a guy named Tony who has nerves of steel, hooked onto the cable. I held the hover steady, sweat pouring down my neck despite the cold, as Tony lowered himself down to the ledge. When Tony reached him, the hiker couldn't even stand. He was dead weight. Tony managed to strap him into the rescue harness, and we winched them both up, swinging precariously in the wind. We flew them to a flat meadow further down the valley where it was safe to land. As soon as the skids touched the grass, we jumped out to assess him. This is where things got weird. The man had only been missing for about 24 hours, but he looked like he had been lost for weeks. He was gaunt, his eyes sunken, and his lips cracked and bleeding. He was severely dehydrated to the point where his tongue was swollen, making it hard for him to speak. We wrapped him in thermal blankets and started an IV. I knelt beside him and asked, "Can you tell us your name?" He looked at me with glassy, vacant eyes. It took him a solid minute to remember who he was. "What happened?" I asked. "How did you get up there?" He stared past me, looking back at the dark tree line. His voice was a raspy whisper. "I was hiking, and I realized someone was following me. He said he didn't know who or what it was, just that he was being hunted. A primal panic took over, and he started running. He ran and climbed without stopping, fueled by pure adrenaline. The next thing he remembered was waking up on that ledge, thousands of feet up, too exhausted and terrified to move. That was it. That was his whole story, but it didn't add up. The bluff where we found him was 15 miles away from where he started his hike. 15 miles of rugged, vertical, snow-covered terrain. To get there in the time he was missing, he would have had to free solo climb sheer rock faces in the dark, without equipment, in freezing temperatures. This guy was a weekend warrior, an accountant from the suburbs. He wasn't a mountaineer. Physically, it should have been impossible. Investigators later combed the area. They found no other footprints in the snow, no sign of a pursuer, no evidence of anyone else on that mountain. The man recovered physically, but his memory of those lost hours never returned. It's just a black hole in his mind. I've replayed this mission in my head 1,000 times. The only logical explanation is a predator, maybe a mountain lion or a bear, triggered a fight or flight response so intense it pushed him beyond human limits. But part of me wonders if it was something else. Something that could chase a man 15 miles through the dark and drive him up a cliff face that no amateur should be able to climb. Whatever he saw out there, it scared him enough to do the impossible. And frankly, the fact that we never found tracks, that scares me too. I was 28 years old, living in Denver, and feeling like my life was finally coming together. I had a great job, good friends, and I had just started seeing a guy named Patrick. We met in a cliché way, both waiting for a cab outside a bar after realizing we were too old and tired for the party scene. He was charming, handsome, and crucially, he didn't drink anymore. We hit it off immediately. Patrick was the perfect gentleman. He opened doors, remembered anniversaries, and listened when I talked. We dated for 2 years and I was head over heels in love. The only thing that ever felt slightly off was his past. He was an open book about his career and childhood, but whenever I asked about his college years, he clammed up. He'd give vague answers about partying too hard and hanging with the wrong crowd, looking visibly ashamed. I figured he had just been a bit of a frat bro and was embarrassed by it, so I never pushed. One weekend, Patrick surprised me. "Let's go hiking," he said. This was shocking because Patrick was a city boy through and through. He loved air conditioning and gadgets. He hated bugs and dirt, but I was thrilled. We had been talking about marriage recently, and I had once told him that my dream proposal would happen somewhere secluded and beautiful in nature. My heart started racing. I knew this was it. The day of the hike was picture perfect. The Colorado sky was a piercing blue. Patrick had gone all out, buying top-of-the-line gear, solar chargers, and fancy water filters. He was nervous, which only convinced me more that he had a ring in his pocket. He led us up a challenging trail to a secluded overlook. It was a steep drop-off with a breathtaking view of the pine forest valley below. We were miles from civilization. I stood there taking in the view, tearing up with happiness. Patrick stood beside me. He looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "You know what I'm going to ask you, right?" he said softly. I laughed, wiping a tear. "Yes," I beamed, waiting for him to kneel. But he didn't kneel. He didn't pull out a ring. He just kept staring at me. "Before I ask," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "there's something I need to tell you. Something you need to know about who I really am." My stomach dropped. The air suddenly felt thin. "Okay," I said slowly. "Do you love me?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you trust me?" "Yes." "Can you keep a secret? The most important secret of my life?" I nodded, terrified. Then he started talking. He told me about his sophomore year of college in Arizona. He told me about a warehouse rave he went to with his fraternity brothers. He met a girl there. They flirted, they kissed, and then they went outside for some air. He went to get drinks, and when he came back, he found her stumbling around, completely wasted, or more likely, drugged. He guided her away from the crowd, not to help her, but to take advantage of her. He admitted without blinking that he assaulted her while she was barely conscious in a dark corner of the lot. I felt bile rise in my throat. The man I loved was confessing to being a monster. I wanted to scream, to run, but we were on the edge of a cliff. He continued. He said he left her there, passed out to go drink more. When he came back an hour later, she was awake. She was sober enough to realize what had happened. She was screaming at him, telling him she was going to the police, that his life was over. Patrick's face darkened as he recalled this. I snapped, he said. I saw my future disappearing. Prison, shame, ruin. I couldn't let that happen. I didn't mean to kill her, he said, looking me dead in the eye. I just wanted her to be quiet. I grabbed her throat to scare her, but I squeezed too hard. He described the feeling of her larynx crushing under his thumbs. He described watching the light go out of her eyes. He killed her right there behind the warehouse. Instead of calling for help, he got his best friend from the frat. Together, they put her body in a trunk and drove her out to a state forest. They buried her somewhere deep, somewhere no one would ever find her. Silence hung between us. The wind whistled through the trees. Patrick looked at me, looking for a reaction. I'm not that guy anymore, he said. That was the old me. The new me shouldn't have to pay for a mistake I made when I was a kid. Don't you agree? A cold, clarifying fear washed over me. I looked at the drop-off. I looked at the desolate trail. No one knew exactly where we were. If I said no, if I called him a murderer, he would push me. It would be so easy. A tragic hiking accident. He had killed before to protect his future. He would absolutely do it again. I realized I was fighting for my life. I forced a smile onto my face. I reached out and took his hand, suppressing the urge to vomit. I understand, I lied. You were young, you were scared. She was going to ruin your life. I love you, Patrick. The past is the past. I spent the next 2 hours hiking back down that mountain, holding the hand of a killer, talking about our future wedding, pretending to be his accomplice. It was the best acting performance of my life. The moment he dropped me off at my apartment, I locked the door, slid down the wall, and dry heaved until my ribs hurt. Then I called the police. They raided his apartment an hour later, but he was gone. He must have sensed my fear, or maybe he just spooked. His passport was missing. Detectives from Arizona reopened the cold case. They found evidence linking him to the disappearance, but they never found Patrick. They think he fled the country, maybe to Europe. To this day, he is a fugitive. I check the news constantly, hoping to see his face in handcuffs. But my biggest fear is that one day I'll be home alone and I'll hear a familiar knock at the door. I'm an old man now, fixing motorcycles in a garage. But back in the summer of 1977, I was cool. I was the bassist for a touring rock band out of Boston. We weren't famous, but we were living the dream, driving a beat-up van across America, playing gigs and seeing the country. We booked a string of shows through the Rocky Mountains, hitting Utah, Wyoming, and finally Colorado. We landed a gig at a folk music festival in a tiny mountain town called Lake City. It was a beautiful, quiet place. After our set, we mingled with the locals, eating bison burgers and drinking beer. That's when we met Jed. He was an old-timer, a local historian with a leathered face and a love for creepy stories. We bonded over music. He surprisingly knew about Black Sabbath and our shared fascination with the macabre. As the night wound down, Jed leaned in and asked, "You boys want to see a real ghost town tomorrow? Not a tourist trap, but the real deal." We couldn't say no. The next morning, we followed Jed's dusty pickup truck up a winding gravel road deep into the mountains. We eventually hit a dead end and had to hike another mile through dense forest. We emerged into a clearing, and there it was. Carson, a collection of about a dozen rotting wooden buildings, standing silent against the backdrop of the massive peaks. It was eerie, beautiful, and completely dead. Jed told us the history. Carson was founded in 1889 as a silver mining camp. It boomed for a few years, housing 500 men, but by 1895, it was abandoned. "There's the official story," Jed said, lighting a cigarette. "The company says the silver ran dry, but then there's the story my grandfather told me, the one the locals know. He told us that one winter day a massacre occurred. It started as a labor dispute, a strike that turned violent, but it spiraled into something much worse. People in the town heard gunshots echoing from the mine entrance up the slope. Then wounded miners started stumbling down into the camp, bleeding and screaming. The company guards stationed in town grabbed their rifles and ran up to stop the riot. They entered the mine, and they never came back out. When the gunfire finally stopped and the silence returned, the townspeople went up to investigate. What they found was a scene from hell. The mine entrance was littered with bodies. Inside the tunnels, the floor was slick with blood. It wasn't just a shootout. Men had been torn apart, limbs blown off by shotguns at point-blank range, skulls crushed with pickaxes. It was a frenzy of violence. But the scariest part was the guards. They hadn't just fought the miners, they had turned their guns on each other. It was total, mindless chaos. One of the town butcher's sons had run in to help. His father found him deep in the tunnel, eyes wide and vacant, hacking at a corpse with a pickaxe, laughing hysterically. The boy attacked his own father, and the butcher had to kill his son to survive. The survivors realized something was wrong with the mine itself. They dragged the bodies they could reach back inside, and then they used dynamite to collapse the entrance, sealing the dead and the insane survivors inside the mountain forever. "Some say it was a curse," Jed whispered. "Some say it was a gas that drove them mad. But people still find bones in these woods, human bones that washed out of the mine." He offered to help us look for souvenirs, but we politely declined. The vibe in that clearing was heavy, oppressive. We left quickly. When I got back to Boston, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went to the library and researched mining disasters. I learned about hydrogen sulfide, a gas miners call stink damp. In high concentrations, it can cause immediate delirium, hallucinations, and violent psychosis. It fits the story perfectly. The miners likely hit a pocket of gas, went insane, and started slaughtering each other. But there's one thing that keeps me up at night. The gas explains the miners inside, but the guards were outside. They ran into the mine to stop the fighting. Why did they turn on each other so quickly? And why did the butcher's son lose his mind? Gas dissipates. Sometimes I wonder if they dug too deep, if they found something in the dark that wasn't gas, something that is still waiting behind those collapsed rocks, hungry and angry.